I want to do something interesting for July. It's the month I was born, and seeing as I'll be going to VidCon coming up, I wanted to do something easy and unique for the month. It should be no surprise to anyone that I really like video games. That's not a sentiment that I think anyone can't comprehend. A lot of people appreciate games, and it's always a subject that I've secretly wanted to talk about. But director, you're a film YouTuber. You can't talk about video games. That's not your area. Well, I happen to be in luck, because Hollywood loves adapting the out of everything. They literally cannot help themselves. And video games have been ripe for picking from producers who want to make a quick buck off of them for years. So, I say that gives me a big enough loophole for me to fit into the subject. Still object? Well, sit tight, because if you wait long enough, I'll tell you the tale of the saltiest director to ever live. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Video Game Month. I wanted to start this month by discussing a genre of game that I rarely dabble with, mainly because, in layman's terms, I'm kind of a and that genre is horror. Wait, horror? The horror genre? That doesn't sound right. It's a bit weird, isn't it? I have absolutely no trouble with any movie in the horror genre. I don't get scared easily, and I get more irritated with jump scares than I get scared. So how come I can't muster that courage with horror games? Maybe it has something to do with control. In a movie, you're simply watching the horror unfold. But in a game, you have direct control over what happens. Whether your character lives or dies is entirely up to your reaction time and skill. In essence, you're the one in danger. And the survival horror aspect in video games is the one I've been dabbling with for the last couple of years. So I thought I'd take a look at one of the first games in the genre that got adapted into an awful movie franchise. No, I don't mean Resident Evil, as easy a target as that may be.
It's Forrest. Oh my God.
It's awful.
Now you said it, not me. Instead, I want to talk about a movie that's based off of a game that helped inspire not only Resident Evil, but the genre of survival horror itself. Alone in the Dark. So before we discuss the movie, let's talk about the game that it's based off, for context of course. Alone in the Dark, the game, was made in 1992 for PC, later ported to other consoles, and was the first 3D survival horror game ever made, if you couldn't tell from the graphics already, that is. In fairness though, a lot of the survival horror genre of games was defined by the original Alone in the Dark. Ever wonder why Resident Evil utilized tank controls and fixed camera angles? Well, you have this game to thank for it. Although Alone in the Dark had a less defined combat system and is more overall clunky in comparison to its successors. The story of the game is fairly simple. A man named Jeremy Hartwood supposedly killed himself in this particular mansion, and you, either Edward Carnby canonically or Emily Hartwood, have to inspect a piano in the attic because it might be worth something. Although it turns out the mansion's inhabited by all sorts of monsters, and now the only way to escape is to solve the mystery of the death of Jeremy Hartwood. Or you could just leave. Okay, never mind. The game doesn't take very long to beat, but there's a lot of puzzle solving, a couple of fights here and there, and a metric ton of cheap deaths. It's like Resident Evil had an illegitimate child with literally any Sierra game. Oh, what's this? You found an interesting book that's written in Latin? Surprise! It's actually an evil spell that breaks your spine in midair. Dead. Oh, what's this? You could walk through this hallway in the opening cutscene no problem? Well, just try that in-game. Surprise! The floorboards are suddenly unstable. Dead. Oh, what's this? You bumped into this ghost sitting in this chair that you could barely f***ing see? Surprise! The ghost turned into giant death bubbles and you can't escape. Dead. But aside from all that, so long as you save often, this game only takes a few hours to beat. I recommend you go through with a light walkthrough, considering how many items you'll need that you'll have no indication that you'll need them later. I won't go too in-depth on the game itself. There are other reviewers that have covered the game more extensively that I'm sure they are able to do with a lot more effect than I will. Just look up the most popular review of the game. I'm sure they'll give you all the information you need. Oh. Oh no.
Next. What?
Alone in the Dark is not only a staple of survival horror, but gaming history itself. I think that any fan of the survival horror genre should play it at least once, all the way through, to appreciate how far we've come in the genre. And the movie that's based off of it has nothing to do with it. Aside from the fact that they share the same name, there is no similarity between the movie and the game. Quote me on that. Well, mostly it has no similarity. Its main protagonist, portrayed by Christian Slater, may share the same name of Edward Carnby, but just because every protagonist shares the same name in the series does not earn this movie points. In fact, this movie's plot is so bare-bones that it'll only take me a minute to explain it. Here we go. Edward is investigating an old civilization called the Upcani, and then we learn he was experimented on to help the research of the Upcani, and then we meet the curator of a museum, and then the bones wake up, and then Edward Carnby's friend turned rival, who we've never met up to this point, suddenly decides to show up, and then we find an underground base, and then that friend dies, and then the Upcani researcher turns out to be this one guy, and then he dies, and then the base explodes, and then the city's evacuated from a threat we've never seen, and then the movie ends. Now, you're probably wondering, why did I take so little time to describe the plot? Well, it's because I'd like to use this opportunity to demonstrate my writing process. Did you notice how I use the words "and then" to transition between events when describing the plot of this movie? Well, it plays right into the principality of my writing method, which goes as follows. If, at any point when you are describing your plot, you end up using the words "and then" to transition from one event to the next, go back. You f***ed up. If your plot can simply be boiled down to "and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then the movie's over," then your plot essentially has no tack to it. Nothing is going to hold together. Your plot should be like a piece of taffy. It should stretch and bend, where the more you pull, the bigger it gets. It's easy to bite into, there's so much flavor, you're still savoring on it long after you've eaten it. If there's nothing holding your plot together, it ends up fragile, like candy glass. It becomes so unstable that the moment you try to bite into it, the whole damn thing breaks. Also, you find out the hard way that it doesn't taste very good. So how do you do that? How do you get that taffy tenderness to your plot? Simple. Follow the rule of therefore. Now, I don't just mean switch out the word itself. I wish it were that easy. What I mean is that in a sequence of events, each event should build off of the previous one. They should happen because of the previous event, not just after it. Characters should act on something because of what happens, not just because the script says, go here. Let's use an example from a movie. John Wick. John Wick is a retired assassin. His wife died, and he's in mourning. All he has left to remember her is a dog that she gave him post-mortem to help him cope with the loss of her. Therefore, John bonds with the dog. But uh-oh, a mobster just came by and killed the dog. Now John has nothing left of his wife. It's all been taken from him. Therefore, he goes on a massive killing spree until the mobster and his thugs are all dead. There's a reason something like this is called an inciting action. And the response from Wick is something the audience can sympathize with too. I too would go on a murderous rampage if someone killed my dog. I mean, if I were a former assassin, and I actually had a dog. I wish I had a dog. The movie is a series of and-thens with barely anything tying them together. They spend a hell of a lot of time trying to flesh out the backstory, sure, but in doing that, they forget to string the events of the main story together. So, okay, the movie's poorly written. It's also badly acted. Among other things, I could spend all day talking about that, but let's focus on the writing here. You might say, so what if it's badly written? Bad writing happens all the time with movies, especially with video game movies. So what's so different about this one? And yeah, I'll give you that much. Yes, bad writing happens a lot, but most of the time, bad writing is something you can narrow down. Sometimes it's a brand new writer. Sometimes it's time constraints. Sometimes it's budget cuts. Sometimes it's writer strikes because of those budget cuts. All of those, I can forgive. If you can sit there and hear me say that I am willing to forgive Transformers 2 for having bad writing, then that should tell you how much I'm willing to forgive when it comes to bad writing. However, there is one instance of bad writing that I absolutely cannot and shall not forgive. And that instance is when the writer does not care. If you don't care about what you're writing, what makes you think anybody else is going to care about it? And that's exactly the problem with Alone in the Dark. Nobody gave a shit. And that's not an accident. The people who made this movie purposefully did not give a shit. And it all starts to make sense why when you look at the man who directed and produced the movie, Uwe Boll. Yes, it's Uwe, trust me, I have reason to know. Who is Uwe Boll, you may ask? Well, the short answer is that he's a complete fraud. But yeah, Uwe Boll is the primary reason I wanted to talk about this movie. As a director myself, I have every reason to despise this sham of a sauerkraut. He's essentially the worst of the liver, if you catch my drift. Uwe Boll is... apparently was, a director who was infamous in cinema for producing and directing adaptations of video games, as well as, well, whatever the hell this is, all of which turning out to be complete garbage. All of them. Every single film he has ever done has turned out to be complete schlock. But why? Was he just misguided? Maybe he couldn't get the people around him to see his image. Sorry, that's to being too kind. As you might have guessed from the name, Uwe Boll is a German director. Because of that, he can list every film that he makes as German in name only. Now you're probably asking, what difference does that make? Well, if you familiarize yourself with German tax law, you'll realize it actually makes a huge difference. I'll link some articles down below that explain this loophole a little better than I could, but here's the gist of it. Essentially, around mostly the 2000s, German tax law made the production costs on films tax deductible. The reason they did this was so they could encourage European directors to help make more films to compete with America's Hollywood. So, if, say, you made $200 million in a year, but you spent $150 million on a film, you would only have to pay the taxes on the remaining $50 million. That other $150 million being tax deductible. The only catch to this is that taxes would have to be paid on whatever the movie ended up grossing from theaters, which means that the lower the return on the movie, the less taxes that had to be paid on it, which means that it was more profitable to make a movie that made less money because it didn't have to be taxed as hard. So what better way to ensure a movie makes less money than purposefully making the movie garbage? Which is exactly what Uwe Boll's production company, Boll KG, did. They made low-budget films that 100% of which could be deducted from taxes, purposefully making them some of the biggest disasters in cinematic history, and then hardly paying any taxes on the return. And that, my lovelies, is the big crux of my frustration with Uwe Boll. And it doesn't stop there. It would already be irritating enough if Uwe Boll was just an absolute fraud of a director. If he embraced that fact, I'd probably look at him like I do at Michael Bay or anyone else running around in that business, or Eli Roth making the same movies over and over again. But that facade doesn't work for Uwe Boll. Mainly because, well, he kind of takes himself a little too seriously.
Because look, I'm not a f***ing retard like Michael Bay or other people running around in that business, or Eli Roth making the same movies over and over again. If you really look in my movies, you will see my real genius. So you have to really wake up and you have to see me what I am. I'm the only genius in the whole f***ing business.
And I suppose to some extent you have to be a little clever to discover an exploit in your government's tax law. To be fair, you have to have a very high IQ to— Shut your f***ing mouth! However, as genius as it may be, it is not artistic genius, something that Uwe Boll firsthand will constantly try to tell you otherwise. Uwe Boll gets so defensive about his own movies that it reached a point where he challenged a set of critics who lambasted his movie to a boxing match. Yes, a boxing match. KSI Logan Paul style boxing match. And then he tried to use the footage and put it on the DVD for his adaptation of Postal. Oh God, this guy's more salty about himself than I am when I talk about former Missouri Governor Eric Greitens. Look that up. And that right there is where I have to draw the line. You want to game the whole system and invade taxes with cheap, shitty films? Fine. Not like I could stop you anyway. But you can't also, at the same time, act like you're the greatest director to ever live. If I had a student bring me homework that had no effort thrown at it, and I told them, hey, not only is this homework assignment very wrong, but it's very apparent that you did not put any effort in this, I'm giving you a failing grade, would it then be reasonable for the child to go,
how fucking dare you? I'm better than everyone in this goddamn classroom, and you fucking fail me? I'll fight you in the ring, you fucking...
You can't talk down to anyone when you sink yourself that low. And that is Uwe Boll's problem. He may have retired from directing now, but that doesn't mean he's out of the game. Just look at his Letterboxd reviews. I Hate Everything did a video covering some of them, and I'll link that video in the description as well, but just look at his reviews on Letterboxd, and I'll give you 3 guesses as to which movies are the only ones he's given 5 stars. If you make mistakes, if you sink too low, you don't act like everyone around you is at fault. I have no doubt he will end up seeing this video one way or another because he's that self-centered about himself. So, let's end on this note. The truth is, Uwe Boll has no one to blame for his reputation but himself. He threw his artistic vision away in exchange for money. He dragged down properties like House of the Dead, Far Cry, Dungeon Siege, Blood Rain, and Alone in the Dark just to make a return on investment through shady tax loopholes. He berated and fought against anyone who called him out, and still does. And at the end of the day, the only one to blame for the situation he's in now is himself. The reason why no one will crowdfund his movies, the reason why he can't get anywhere on Kickstarter, and the reason he is treated as a complete joke in cinema is because he's just that. A joke. So what, he's got a restaurant now in Vancouver. It's apparently a 4-star one. Here's my advice. If you ever go out there, keep an eye on the seasoning. Because at least now you know where all the salt's coming from.